welcome everybody to a new panel. Well, basically, we have people all over the world joining this one as well. Let me briefly introduce them to you. So we have Brian joining us from New York. He's the co-founder and general partner of Refashioned Venture Capital Fund. They invest in early stage startups within supply chain and logistics. Brian, thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Then we have Eric, who is the senior editor for technology in supply chain and logistics for GAOC. He covers a lot of the startups and logistics technology that are having an impact on global logistics and trade. Eric, thanks for joining us and welcome.
Thanks, Radu, for having me.
Then we have Luca, who is the head of digital innovation at DSV. He's leading the DSV Innovation Hub by developing digital innovation and corporate ventures for global logistics and supply chain management as part of the DSV Panalpina Group. Luca, thanks for joining us out of Switzerland, Europe.
Correct. Hello, everyone, and thanks for the invitation.
And Anders is the head of product management for Orkestra SCS. He has more than 30 years of supply chain solutioning and strategic software experience in global supply chains, and obviously is the mastermind behind developing the product at Orkestra. Anders, thanks for joining us and pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Radu. It's a pleasure to be invited. Thank you.
From Singapore, sorry.
From Singapore, yes.
From Singapore, fairly late in the day for you. So thanks for making the time. Now, let me start with, I'll start this as I have you on my screen, right? So maybe first question, Brian, for you a little bit, let's go through a recap of what you see from a VC perspective of the major trends driving growth right now in logistics tech, also taking into account that there's deals after deals after deals happening, or so it seems. Over to you.
So the first time, I remember when I first spoke to Eric, I think it was in 2016. Eric was still at American Shipper. And I made the comment that early stage VCs have not paid enough attention to supply chain more broadly speaking, and logistics in particular, because one, the opportunity is big if you understand that global GDP is all based on supply chains and logistics, and I tend to describe a logistics as the linchpin of supply chain. And so, yes, there are a lot of deals happening, and to an outsider, it can seem like VCs have completely lost their minds. I still think that we're just scratching the surface, because at least at the early stage, as a seed investor, you expect that maybe 9 out of the 10 investments you make could fail. And so you've got to make a lot of investments. And then if you multiply that by the number of VCs who are finally, because of the pandemic, waking up to the opportunity and, supply chain and logistics, then it makes sense that you wake up every day and like 6 new deals have been done and you feel like you're suffering from whiplash. So I think we're just getting started.
Eric?
Yeah, as I was thinking about what we were going to discuss today, I went back and looked at some kind of fragments of information and thoughts that I sort of bookmark and kind of keep returning back to. And one of them is what exactly attracts VC to certain markets and what founders sort of concentrate on. And I try to think about that within the framework of logistics. And one of the things that you hear a lot of very successful VCs, sometimes ex-founders who've turned VCs, talk about is take a market that is very fragmented, where people are sort of, on the whole, fairly unhappy with their service in some way, and figure out a way to address that. And I think that's what we've seen over the last 5 years is a slow trickle, kind of the early leading wave. And now almost every VC is at least looking at ways to sort of place a bet or two into the space, because they have all had now 5, 6, 7, 8, sometimes 10 years of education about what makes this market unique. The interesting thing is there's also been sort of a backlash to that in terms of the incumbents in the space have they didn't need to wake up. They were always awake, but they've become much more attuned to what the VCs are sort of are doing to focus on, the areas that the VCs are focusing on in terms of their investments. And they like logistics providers and like incumbent technology providers for the last 30 years, they're on it, right? And so we have this, what Brian described, it seems like there's just this flood of not just investments, but new products, new strategic partnerships, incubation of in-house ideas, incubation of sort of outside companies. It's really a lot all at once. So it's actually, it's hard to sort of pick one value driver. Some people will say it's the need to be resilient, to create resiliency in supply chains. Some people will say it's all about visibility and predictive, so you can make decisions based on that. Like people will say it's all about automation. I say it's sort of all of the above, because like we always talk about in logistics, there are different drivers for every single business, and each region has its own sort of characteristics that it needs to catch up on.
Anders, when you design a product, right? So Orkestra is a startup scale up. How do you think about it, right? I mean, it's kind of a combination of fixing a problem at the same time iterating. Tell us a little bit about how do you keep on top of those iterations, I guess.
Well, I think the initial thing is, when you're looking at being a startup, you typically find a problem scenario, a problem area, and then you try to find a product that fits that problem area. The problem with most of the startups that we've seen coming up is that they pick a space which is rather narrow and don't understand how, when then they realize that not every single company have that single problem. And I think that's a lot of what we try to do with the Orkestra idea, is to create a platform where you can kind of like look at what everybody else have done, but then bring it all together in a single pane of glass or a single lens, where you can visualize all these things end to end. And I think that's a little bit of, again, one of the, I would say to a certain degree, deficit of a lot of startups. They only focus on port to port. But when you look at the spend of supply chain, if you look at the procure to pay and all the way to e-com delivery, which we see now massively booming, to have a single tool that can capture all of that under one single, let's say, view is I would say to a big degree missing in the market space. And that was a lot of the vision that came about with this one, is to have, number one, the platform, but also the consultancy to understand, well, how do you drive your business, and how do you drive change with the business? How do you drive the culture of your organization and the people that you need to have involved in your supply chain? And then, of course, also looking at the 4PL operation. Because like we've seen with a lot of platforms or digital freight forwarders, they all started off as, we just want to be a software provider. We just want to deliver the software. But the reality is, when let's say you check into a hotel, it's no question who's responsible for the service. And the same thing with an airline. So I think if you book with the platform, the expectation is that if I have an issue, I can resolve it through your platform. And that's where most of these organizations somehow starts to falter and fail, is because they just don't have the people on the ground. There's nobody who can pick up the phone at 8 o'clock in the evening and fix a container stuck at customs or in a port, that have that kind of connectivity. So what we tried to do with this idea was really about connecting legacy operators, if you may, with a little bit more modern technology that really it's more agile and fresh in the front end, but not replacing the TMS of the freight forwarders, but visualizing what they're doing and then enabling the pathway to resolve issues using the existing network providers. That's essentially some of the visions that came about in that one. And I think there's a lot of areas of contention when it comes to the vision of a freight forwarder. So typically, they don't operate as a single entity, other than financially, across the entire spectrum of supply chain services. you have a very much P&L oriented service offering. And this is, of course, an area where I think a lot of the disruptors have an opportunity to close the gap in creating that cross business unit experience.
Luca, I guess you're sitting, as a corporate innovation, right, as part of DSV. Tell us a little bit about how you view things, and also how do you incorporate, right? Maybe that's quite an interesting angle as well. So let's say that you stumble across a very good startup innovation and so on that you invest in. How do you make sure that you incorporate it fast within the bigger structure that DSV is?
I mean, yeah. First of all, I think we are in a very exciting time. Really, things are accelerating. So Logtech innovation started a couple of years ago. Yeah, I mean, when you look at the startup ecosystem, and meanwhile, much more funding and much more resources have been pumped to build these solutions. And and we as a corporate, we really take part in that. So how do we make use of that, all that momentum to improve this industry, to leverage all these inefficiencies, increase the productivity? Is that we have also founded a dedicated team to digital innovation, with different backgrounds, different capabilities, and we follow also the lean startup approach in trying to find out a product market fit of things what our customers are asking for, and we test it. Yeah, we go on a step-by-step approach and make some hypothesis, do a POC, think about a pilot. So maybe work before in a closed data environment, and then go into a real environment and find out if things work. Of course, by that, always asking the customer, the internal customer, or our, let's say, DSV customer, what he thinks about the solution, getting constantly feedback, improving and validating the business case. And then, yeah, you're right, then comes the interesting part when we have validated and say, hey, it's a great product, something to be used, to be integrated, then to bring that into the pipeline, of course, into the production pipeline of our IT. That's then the challenge, but meanwhile, we have also gained experiences on that to really check on the critical aspects right before, I mean, on safety, security aspects, network aspects, etc. So to really check early on that, and having a process in place, and also dedicated resources, not only on the innovation side, but also on the side of integrating into the innovations into our core systems. So that's, let's say, one way how we do it. The other way is if we build, this is also what we do, if we build new business or digital new business models, that's something we still, as an innovation unit, accompany for some time. So we help in scaling the idea, and just don't give them right over, and maybe even think about the idea to found a separate company, and to let it aside for a while. It depends how, let's say, disruptive it is, or it depends how different the product is with regards to our core business.
I'll stay with you a little bit, Luca, and then I'll open this to the whole panel, right? So you disrupting logistics, right? It's actually the title of the book you co-authored, right, with a few other authors. I'd like to drill down maybe to some examples, if you may, right? As I think that the more concrete we can get, the better. Whether you want to share from DSV or from the book, right? Of maybe one idea, one innovation, one startup that was integrated with successfully in a larger organization, and that paid off dividends in some way, shape, or form. I think let's take an example if we can, and then I'll open up to the broader panel as well.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you mentioned the book, and thanks a lot for doing also some promotion about that. So that gives a complete overview.
Very good.
Yeah. So that's about what's currently, we try to really to portray what's currently happening really in the Logtech environment, all the solutions in the different areas, from last mile to e-commerce logistics, visibility solutions, digital forwarding, etc., warehouse automation. But you asked me for one concrete example, and I take a real DSV example, because that's something we have been recently integrating and experimenting, and it has to do with drones, but indoor drones. So we tested drones in our warehouses, and we came from the technology side and said, is there a use case where it makes sense to use drones indoor in our warehouses? And it was really also at the early times when the first startups also started to work on that. And we very quickly identified the inventory control cycle counting process. That's something to automate. That's something really which is also not very much liked by our staff. It's very, very repetitive and also dangerous working on high levels in the rack. And with the drone, you might, and for sure, you can be much more productive. So we then looked into different kind of solutions on the market, and they were only partly automated. And then we said that doesn't make sense. So if you substitute someone with a scanner with someone with a remote control steering the drone, even though this might be faster. But then we found a product. It's a fully autonomous product. And we did a proof of technology. We did the pilot over four weeks. We observed more than 3,000 flights, scanned almost 20,000 locations, and we could really prove that this brings value, could validate the business case. And then we started the discussion of how to integrate this kind of, you can say, AGV into our core system. So to integrate it, let's say, into the network system and also integrate it into the WMS system so that the data the drones are collecting flows into the WMS and vice versa. And it's a way to try that. It's a new technology, and also the vendor we worked with, of course, maybe they were at the beginning not up to all our security requirements we have as a major forwarder. But throughout that process, we learned how to do it, and there was also a lot of openness by our IT colleagues to look at new ways of integrating things. Yeah, so that is a very recent successful example.
That's actually a great example from my perspective, because in late 2019, we were looking at a startup and trying to decide if we should make an investment or not. And it turns out that if I had talked to Luca at that time, I might have understood the opportunity a lot better than I did.
Do it next time.
But there were questions about, how big is the opportunity really, and how many companies are going to adopt this sort of thing. And then, there's the whole issue of safety, safety from the perspective of cybersecurity, because you're introducing these drones connected to your network, and what risks does that expose the network to, the DSV network to? And then on the other side, just physical safety, right? So what if one of these drones has an accident and someone is injured? And put all those things together, we stepped away very slowly from from the investment.
Yeah, it looks like that you joined the discussion with our IT colleagues.
Radu, I wanted to jump in because I wanted to connect a couple of different threads that we've talked about already, specifically something Anders said with this idea of like what is actually disruptive and where kind of investment plays a role. So I think what Anders said about the sort of niche areas that startups tend to focus on, I think is very actually an important point. And I think of it from this point of view. The ability to build something that does a very wide range of things and could potentially address a huge set of needs, and something that Brian TAM for down the road, where you're literally embedding yourself into an organization, become indispensable, touch a million different parts of the organization. That is extremely hard to actually sell into the logistics industry, because there are hundreds of thousands of service providers, some of whom have their own technology and services. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of software providers. You're competing in a very complicated selling market, and you're selling to people who tend to have very long sales cycles in terms of what they consider. And a lot of them may not have budget they may only have budget sporadically. So it makes sense that a startup focuses on a very distinct use case where it can get a lot of adoption in a very niche. I write this all the time. Like there's niches of niches of niches in our world.
Yeah.
And that doesn't create a lot of TAM initially. It may down the road, but initially it doesn't. And really what it leads to is you get to a certain size, you run into the ceiling of your niche, and then you get acquired.
Yep.
And then you go into this big suite of software, and you may not be very well integrated. You're less valuable than you were when you're independent, actually, in a way. But you're part of this big thing, and it's a good exit for that company, maybe. But it's not really like changing the landscape of the industry, like maybe they set out to do initially. So there's this constant friction between what you can actually build as a startup versus this idea of like completely disrupting the way people do things.
And to add on that one, I think there's this inherent belief that all the cargo is, let's say, equipped with a barcode, a traceable barcode, and without that barcode, it will not work. Right. Yeah. And I think the other thing also with a lot of these startups, as you mentioned, Eric, they're being acquired. It's a little bit the same analogy with 3PLs. There are two ways of buying companies as a 3PL. You can buy them and you can let them operate as they did in the past for the next 25 years, or you kick out the finance system, you kick out the freight forwarding system, and you can deploy everything to one single system. And I think what I've seen with a lot of the biggest acquisitions been done the last 5 to 6 years, I don't think most of them have been, let's create one company where everybody is operating under the same ethos and ideology and technology stack and what have you.
I'm going to jump in with two things I spend a lot of time thinking about. So often when VCs and a lot of other folks who think about disruption are talking about disruption, they're talking about one kind of disruption, which is the innovator's dilemma, what's been popularized in the innovator's dilemma, right? And that's one of two. It turns out that the proponents of both types of disruption at Harvard University. So in the Clayton Christensen disruption, right, you create something that's slightly inferior to what's on the market. You start selling to people who are unhappy with an engineered, over mature product, and you work your way up. In Barbara Henderson's disruption, which people who talk about it describe as architectural disruption, you come up with a completely different way of satisfying the need of the market. And I think a lot of the time, when we focus on the Clayton Christensen style of disruption, the demand side disruption, it limits how we think about the possibilities of what can happen. And then the other thing is about platforms. So I think in Platform Business is the title of the book. They talk about two types of platforms. So one is a platform that just enables transactions, just enables counterparties to transact with one another. Interesting, but not very disruptive and exciting. And then the other is an innovation platform, which enables you to transact with one another, but enables all the parties on the platform to create value for one another, independent of whoever is managing the platform. And I don't think we've seen, at least in logistics, I don't think we've seen enough of the innovation platforms yet. My hypothesis is that with all the advances in all the technologies that enable that kind of value creation and interaction, we're going to see more value, more innovation platforms in supply chain than we've seen, and in logistics than we've seen in the past.
And the key, Brian, is that when they come and pitch you, make sure you don't pass on.
Well, first I have to raise the fund.
By the way, I'll just say that in the comment we have Sean that commented that he has some very good ideas on drones and so on, and a patent pending. So just have a look at that. He's also pitching to you and to Luca. So, hey, Eric, I saw that. Yeah,
Radu, can I just really quickly? I wanted, because you talked about concrete examples, and I'm not doing this to call out anyone. Like, I think all of these things are very valuable in their own way. I'm just trying to kind of give people a sense of like the scale and the worth or value of a company versus an early stage company that got a lot of buzz. So Containers, which started a few years ago, with a K.
Yeah.
They made a lot of buzz, and rightly so, because they were enabling forwarders and carriers to quickly build instant quoting, instant booking capability that they largely had ignored. Yeah. It was a really exciting idea. I think they got a fair amount of traction for an early stage company. They hadn't taken a lot of venture capital, and they ended up selling to Descartes for somewhere between 6 to 12 million, depending on what performance.
What you believe, right? Yeah.
Okay. So they had obviously different exit ambitions based on not taking a lot of venture capital early. And they, I think, saw value of being part of a bigger kind of sales organization, touches a lot of different points of a forwarder's business. I'm going to juxtapose that with a company called LlamaSoft, which was a supply chain design software company widely used by a lot of brand name shippers. Something like 800 customers. We all probably know off the top of our head a lot of these customers.
They used to be one of them.
Yeah. They started 20 years ago, somewhere around in the .com boom, and sold last year to Coupa, the procurement software provider, for 1.5 billion. Right. So they had taken some PE investment, but no VC investment, as far as I know. But that was a 20-year slog, progression, whatever you want to call it, to get to the point to have a pretty decent exit. And Containers was a very short exit, but at a much smaller, number. So what I'm saying is, like, there's not the same type of Coinbase, DoorDash, like hoopla consumer-based kind of multiples that are possible in a very short period of time in logistics, as I see it. So that raises an interesting point, because I think about, and I'd love to hear what Anders and Luca have to say about this. But my hypothesis is that some of the innovations we will see that will succeed at being disruptive will come from teams that have really deep experience in logistics, but also have really deep understanding, really deep and nuanced understanding of the technology. And it's that combination of industry experience and an understanding of what's possible with the technology that will enable them to do something that really shakes things up in the way that the supply side innovation theory contemplates. And that will be because, based on 30 years in the industry, 20 years in the industry, they just understand fundamentally what has to change in order for the technology to live up to its promise. That's my hypothesis. And if someone is in that sort of situation, please look me up online and let's talk, because as soon as the fund is up and running, I'd love to fund that type of team.
I fully agree with what you say, Brian, and that's actually also how we set up our innovation team. Yeah? It's also of a mixture of logistics experts, people who have built digital products also in other industries. We also have serial entrepreneurs in our team who really understand the language of the startup ecosystem. And you need to bring that together. And of course, I missed the whole, of course, our software engineering colleagues. So we are also able, as a digital innovation team, to develop things on ourselves and do also work on integrations, of course. So that mixture makes is really, I think, also the recipe to success. And if you see what happens with the successful startups and when they raise a new round, and then it's not only that they invest into tech, but they invest then into building up further logistics expertise. They also hire senior logistics executives who give them, of course, access to expertise, also to customers, but also really the deep knowledge of how to apply the technology in the company.
And Anders?
Yeah, so of course,
this is your moment of blowing your own trumpet.
Yeah, of course, I'm just don't take away my control.
Maybe I should have pre-framed it. Orkestra is the best company I have seen. Understands with about 25 years.
No, but the thing is, I've been a freight forward for 30 years. I've been doing technology for 30 years. So I fit kind of like the previous profile quite well. No, but to be frank, I think, I mean, you don't do what I've done on your own, right? It's not a single person thing that you do, and to the point, it's all about building the right type of teams, and I always took all of my team members from within the company and from the forwarding side. Very few people were brought in from the IT side, because the idea first and foremost have to function. It needs to answer the questions and the needs from a market. And I've been probably hands-on implementing more than 1,000 customers in my lifetime. All in different verticals, all in different territories of this planet. And I can tell you, there's not a single one of them that had exactly the same requirement. Yeah. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges when you're starting to go, like Eric said before, when you're starting to go wide, you need to go very, very, very deep if you want to capture all the functionalities. And I think a lot of technologies, they have two ways of doing this. Either they stay very, very shallow. They have a wide capability, but very shallow in the case of how they can do it. And then that's where the disruptors can come in. They can create that deeper dive of those specific customers that have additional needs. But then a lot of the challenges then becomes a lot of the wide, let's say, shallow technologies that are sitting on the planet are proprietary. They are not built for collaboration. They're built for a tool for the inside, not for a tool that talks in and out. Plus, they are lacking the capabilities of APIs within the individual modules of the tool. And I think that's one of the challenges that I saw in my previous organization when we tried to look into, well, how can we embed modern startups into the ecosystem? And it really came down to the lack, or let's say, limited capability of integrating using smarter methodologies. And of course, as we talked about before, security will always be an issue, right? So I think this is a little bit where the startup scene are a little bit more loose when it comes to actual security. Yep. But they're catching up very, very fast. Don't get me wrong; they're catching up very, very fast. But I think that's probably one of the areas that are lacking with a lot of startups. Number one, they don't understand the actual business case of customers. And they think that one company operates the same way around the world. I mean, I literally I've been working with customers that have 21 different SAP implementations that didn't speak to each other. So you can imagine how easy it is to build technology around something like this. Right? So I think that's a little bit the unknown. You know, what you don't know, but it's come to realization very quickly when you try to convince customers that you have the best and greatest on the planet, and then they realize, yeah, but we can't even work with it. Even if we wanted to, we can't work with it.
And I want to jump in with a question for all of you. I want to open up a little bit, hopefully a Pandora box. What, in your view, is the most overrated technology, and what about the most underrated technology at the moment? So I'll start as I begin. So Brian, over to you first.
So I think deep learning, and I'm talking specifically with relation to supply chain and logistics, right? I'm not talking in general, but I think deep learning specifically, if you're in supply chain and a startup comes to you and they say, oh my God, we have the best deep learning to solve all your problems in logistics, please, please, please turn around, run, call 911, shout fire, because I don't think anything good is going to come out of that. And the reason is that deep learning requires so much data to train the algorithms and the systems. And as you know, in logistics and supply chain, the future never looks like the past. So no matter how much data you feed these systems, they're going to, what's coming in the future is going to be completely unlike anything you had in the past. I mean, 2020 has taught us that, right? That and so that's one I think is overrated. Now that doesn't mean in the future things cannot change, but I think right now that's an issue. And then in terms of one that's underrated, I think visibility is still underrated in spite of how much buzz has been generated by, you know, Four Kites and Project 44 and Tive and all those others raising rounds. And the reason I think is, you know, if you believe that a lot of what happens in logistics and supply chain is about making decisions on a sequential basis, then understanding the state of the network is absolutely important. And so my argument is that visibility is really the backbone on which everything else is going to rest.
Eric?
So I swear I did not plan this, but Brian can vouch, we came up with these independently. I'm going to actually say the exact opposite, but with a little bit of nuance. So I think underrated, I'll start with underrated. I think RPA, so basic automation, I'm not talking about sort of autonomous models that are decision making, you know, taking decisions out of the hands of people. But I think the impact of automation on a fairly basic level to do things that are not really value add for an organization, especially in the forwarding industry, is I don't think people understand how quickly this is going to start to take over. We're still so far away, as Lucas said, from sort of automating the end-to-end process, and we may never get to that point. But there is a certain amount of stuff that LSPs in particular do that can easily be automated and should be automated. That's not the higher level decision making stuff, but so I still think that's underrated right now. I actually think visibility is a little overrated. I've been writing about this subject for 16 years, and every year it's the biggest topic and it's the thing that people most aspire to have, and every year the goalposts kind of get moved for what is supposed to be available and what we're supposed to aspire to. I don't think it's unimportant, but I think there's other things that could potentially move the needle more than having granular visibility and you know, the types of predictive visibility that people, I say this knowing that like buyers in the market are really interested in visibility. I'm just saying, me personally,
yeah.
I think it's a bit overrated unless you kind of tie it to some other value proposition within the organization.
Brian, let me crack. Don't get personal. So the reason why Eric says that, he's been fed up of writing about visibility for 16 years. He wants a new subject. Please understand.
I want AR. I want AR visibility. I don't want computer screen.
But let me quickly say something, because Eric has brought up two topics I'm really interested in. At my old firm at KEC Ventures, I sourced and we invested in a company called Ayehu. I think this was in 2012 or 2013. And that is a robotic process automation company, right? So I was thinking about this before a lot of it became the buzz. And the way I think about it, for RPA to be as effective as it can be, for it to fulfill its potential, those processes and algorithms have to be able to see several steps ahead, right? If I do this based on the state of the network at this time, what's likely to be the consequence? And that's why I still make the argument that, as jaded as we all are about visibility, fundamentally, it is still the foundation on which a lot of these other things are going to rest.
Well, look, as a Romanian, I can only subjectively say that RPA is the future, because the biggest company that does UiPath is Romanian, and I think what Eric is, there's many different parts of RPA, and I will switch after this to Anders and Luca, because we're running out of time. I do want their answers as well. But RPA, it can be very push-pull type of, I don't know, you put an invoice into an inbox kind of a thing. I think that's what Eric is meaning, not necessarily super complicated processes. Okay. But I'll jump to Anders. Anders and Luca, 2 minutes each. What's your views on this? Underrated, overrated?
Well, I give a quick note on the RPA. So I think RPA, from the foundation of the way it's being deployed, it's a patchwork for a non-functional system. Okay, so what I mentioned before, we did narrow, very shallow systems. It creates depth for those kind of systems. So on one side, I think it is overrated, but at the same time, if you're smart about it, I think it's totally underrated, because that could be your tool to make those more sophisticated use cases very valuable. So I think in that space, I think it goes a little bit both ways. And equally, when it comes to visibility, I think the actual physical port-to-port visibility, I think, is massively overrated. When we look at the time spent to get from the factory to the port and onto a vessel, and from the vessel into the hinterland, those are the areas that are massively underrated in terms of the needs for visibility. But the actual port-to-port and predicting a vessel going to arrive 5 minutes before or later, I think that really doesn't take the box, in my opinion, of being exciting. But I think in terms of really underestimated technology, which is coming up, and hopefully is coming up fast, is really about technology that connect network on networks, and not think in. I mean, if you think about it this way, most technology currently today, they operate in a linear way, and I think we need to get to a stage where technology operates in a non-linear way, where a job is created, but we don't necessarily know how it's going to be created, or finalized at the end on this journey.
Thank you, Anders. Luca?
Yeah, I also take a distinctive view on what you have already mentioned. So let's start with the overrated, and I would say it depends on at what time you look at these things. Yeah. So I think at the moment overrated in the way, but only at the moment, because that might change quickly in future, is something like additive manufacturing, because still we don't print yet all our goods, we still ship them. Yeah. Of course, they're first use cases, first products, spare parts, but it's said that this will really boost maybe in 2025, but for now yet we don't see it. We have started to engage and offer products in that regards, but it's slowly picking up. And the other thing is, of course, we know about the blockchain discussion. So that was very hyped, let's say 1 or 2 years ago. And it was like a gold rush mentality. So everyone was running and building applications with blockchains. And I think kind of 80% of the approaches failed. Why? Yeah, of course, often there was not the real use case behind, or blockchain didn't make sense. You could just use also a cloud solution. Or then the third element, and that's, of course, particularly for industry, scalability is difficult. So if you don't work with the same standards, with the same process, with the same application throughout the different parties in the supply chain, then it's difficult to embrace that. But this also might change, because if we have a true trust case and we really want to solve smart contract issues, digitizing documents, valuable documents, change of ownership documents, etc., then it can play a role, but it's not yet taking off. Well, that brings me now to what is underrated. I think in general, the potential for AI applications, and that's very broad, of course, in our industry, is huge. And in that sense, it's still underrated. I mean, because it's so many things you can do, from analytics to planning to warehouse automation to the automated vehicles in sales and marketing. So always when you can apply algorithms, of course, generating data, using data, not only historical, but taking data from different sources. So you can work on so many things to improve the efficiencies in our industry. Visibility is still also for me not that for sure. I think it's a question also of cost of the technology. I mean, on the one hand, do we get all the data from all the vessels and carriers of the world? Yeah, and do we get it streamlined? And the other argumentation is about the cost of a tracking sensor. Yeah, in several parts of that industry, there is not the willingness still to pay, let's say, $50 on top of your shipment. for the tracker, because that's why should I? But if someone would also think through properly what he can do with the data, improve the planning, reduce the inventory, inform your customers in time, etc., etc. So if you really think about what could be done with that, then maybe $50 is also worthwhile. But many have the idea, if this gets cheaper and we can then attach a tracker to actually every shipment for, I don't know, $1 or less, I think then it could boost. Yeah. And I think the need is still there. This has been also shown through the COVID pandemic.
Thank you. Well, on that note, guys, thanks a lot. I urge everybody to follow, Brian, Eric, Anders, Luca. Get in touch on social media. Pitch them, obviously. Thanks a lot for your time, for the good sharing, and good luck with all the investments, Brian. Please make sure that you invest in the next Facebook of logistics.
No, well, first, wish me luck raising the fund, because till I raise the fund, I can't actually make investments.
Super. All right, guys. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.